On the night of April 27, 2014, the guards at the SBV Services cash depot in Witbank, South Africa, thought they were in for another uneventful shift. Little did they know, they were moments away from witnessing the biggest cash heist in the country's history. Out of nowhere, around 20 men stormed the facility, not with blazing, but with a plan so bold and cunning that it left everyone stunned. Within minutes, they seized control, overpowered the security, and made off with millions of rands, vanishing into the night as overnight millionaires. This is the story of how the biggest heist in South Africa's history was pulled off. South Africa's struggle with heists didn't start with the SBV Cash Depot heist of 2014. It's a story that goes back decades, marked by daring robberies that shook the nation and proved that when it comes to high-stakes crime, South Africa has always been a battleground. One of the earliest and most infamous heists was the famous Krugersdorp bank robbery in 1977. This wasn't a violent smash and grab. Instead, it was a masterpiece of secret planning. Over a 4-day Easter weekend, criminals didn't break through walls. They quietly dug a very long tunnel, about 35 meters, right underneath a standard bank branch. They started this hidden project from a seemingly normal rented shop nearby. They worked tirelessly, digging out huge amounts of dirt and carefully putting it into 20-kilogram bags, hiding all their progress. To avoid any suspicion, they even covered the shop windows with newspaper, making it look like a new business was just about to open. Once their secret underground path was finished, they popped up inside the bank. From there, they used a powerful cutting torch, called an oxyacetylene torch, to slice their way into the big bank vault. In an almost unbelievable turn of events for the criminals, the bank's alarm systems had actually been turned off. This was because there was noisy construction happening nearby, and the bank didn't want the alarms going off all the time. This incredibly lucky break allowed the robbers to work without being detected. They simply vanished with an estimated 400,000 rands, which is about $22,000 in cash, traveler's checks, and even precious jewelry from safety deposit boxes. For that time, this was an astonishing amount of money, worth many millions in today's money. What makes the Krugersdorp robbery truly chilling is that it has never been solved. No arrests were ever made, and the criminals seemingly got away scot-free, leaving behind a mysterious success for the criminal underworld. This old heist clearly shows that clever, big-scale robberies have been a part of South Africa's story for a very long time, not just a modern problem. As the years went by, the way these heists happened changed. They became much bolder and, sadly, far more violent. The early 2000s saw a worrying rise in attacks on cash-in-transit, CIT, vehicles. These weren't quiet break-ins anymore. They were often brutal, organized operations that looked like military attacks. The tragic Villanora heist in Limpopo in September 2006 stands out as a horrifying example of this increase in violence. During an attack on an armored vehicle, the robbers ruthlessly set the van on fire with the security guards still trapped inside, leading to the death of 4 guards who were alive. This terrible act sent shockwaves across the country, showing a shocking lack of care for human life that sadly became a common sign of some of the most brutal CIT gangs. But one of the most troubling and talked about heists, even to this day, is the SBV Cash Depot heist of 2014. You see, SBV Services has long been regarded as a cornerstone of South Africa's financial security. Established in 1986, it was created to ensure the safe and efficient movement of cash across the country. With major banks like Standard Bank, Absa, FirstRand, and Nedbank as stakeholders, SBV quickly became synonymous with trust and reliability in cash handling. For many South Africans, seeing an SBV armored vehicle meant that money was being transported securely. Their presence in cities and towns provided a sense of assurance that the cash economy was in safe hands. In fact, employees often spoke of a culture that prioritized safety, integrity, and professionalism. This internal culture translated into external trust, making SBV a preferred partner for businesses and banks. However, this perception of SBV as a fortress of security was shattered on the night of April 27, 2014. This wasn't your typical heist. There were no tunnels dug underground, no armored trucks ambushed on highways, and no dramatic Instead, the criminals simply walked through the front gate. It was a heist that didn't rely on brute force, at least not at first. Instead, it was built on deception, confidence, and a chilling level of planning. It was a crime that showed just how far South Africa's heist crisis had evolved, blending the careful planning of old-school robberies with modern elements like insider corruption and ruthless efficiency. The plan began with a convoy of vehicles pulling up to the depot's gates. A group of armed individuals stepped out, dressed smartly, some even in police uniforms. They looked official, confident, and calm. The men approached security personnel posing as employees of SBV's head office. With them were men who appeared to be police officers, complete with uniforms and an air of authority. They said they were there for an urgent internal investigation. According to them, there had been allegations of criminal activity within the depot, and they needed to question the staff immediately. At this point, the guards were understandably cautious. After all, it wasn't every day that head office personnel showed up in the night with law enforcement in tow. However, the way these men presented themselves was convincing. The guards, trained to follow orders from higher-ups, reluctantly granted them access. Once inside the facility, the mood changed abruptly. Without warning, the imposters drew their and overpowered the on-site security. The guards, caught off guard, were restrained and subdued, unable to raise the alarm. The depot, now under the control of these intruders, became a fortress, completely isolated from the outside world. The imposters wasted no time. They headed straight for the cash vault, knowing exactly where it was. They had come prepared. An industrial drill was brought in, a clear indication that the heist had been planned well in advance. The sound of the drill echoed through the facility as they bored through the reinforced structure, each passing second bringing them closer to their massive payday. While the drill did its work, some members of the group maintained control over the employees, ensuring that no one attempted to raise the alarm. Communication devices were confiscated, and staff were threatened with dire consequences if they tried to resist. The tension in the room was palpable as the intruders continued their operation with a calm, almost methodical efficiency. Once the safe was breached, the group began loading cash into bags. The gang moved quickly, scooping up the money and stuffing it into large, rugged bags. They knew time was of the essence, but the night's chaos didn't end there. During the heist, some SBV employees were These unfortunate individuals were forced into vehicles and driven to an undisclosed location. As the convoy sped away, the captives were terrified, unsure of what lay ahead. What happened next was scary. Reports indicated that the criminals attempted to eliminate their captives by administering a toxic substance. It's not entirely clear what the substance was, but it's believed to have been chosen to ensure there were no surviving witnesses. Somehow, either by luck or sheer resilience, the employees survived the ordeal. With the bags of cash and their hostages out of the way, the gang left the depot. Their convoy disappeared into the darkness. For a brief moment, it seemed like they had pulled off the perfect crime. When the guards finally managed to raise the alarm, it was already too late. The cash was gone, the gang had vanished, and the depot was left as a crime scene. News of the heist spread quickly. A staggering 104.4 million rands, that's about 5.7 million US dollars, had been stolen. SBV Services, one of South Africa's leading cash management companies, had been breached, and not by a random gang, but by men who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. But who were these men? How did they know the depot's layout? How did they know how to trick the guards? And who were the people behind the police uniforms? This led the police to launch a massive investigation. Every detail was analyzed. The drill marks on the vault, the way the gang entered, even the way they spoke to the guards. From the beginning, detectives sensed something wasn't right. The way the heist had been executed with precision, confidence, and knowledge of internal security protocols hinted at an inside job. The gang had used uniforms, official-looking documents, and convincing stories to bypass security. It was almost too smooth, too perfect. Investigators began by questioning the guards and employees who were present on that fateful night. They needed to know how the intruders managed to gain entry without resistance. The guards described how the gang had posed as SBV head office staff, accompanied by men in police uniforms claiming to investigate criminal activity. This deception had worked flawlessly, and the guards, bound and helpless, could only watch as the safe was drilled open. As detectives pieced together witness statements and surveillance footage, they noticed something crucial. The imposters seemed to know too much. They knew the layout of the facility. They knew which guards would be on duty. They even knew the exact location of the cash vault. A breakthrough came when investigators traced phone records linked to the depot. They discovered a series of calls made between staff members and individuals with known criminal connections. The timing of the calls raised suspicions. Further scrutiny revealed that some of the numbers belonged to former law enforcement officers. One name kept popping up: Bikani Welcome Shabash. Bikani Welcome Shabash's journey into adulthood began within the South African Police Service, SAPS. This wasn't just any job, it was a calling that led him through the ranks, eventually elevating him to the position of captain. Even more significantly, he became part of the Hawks, a highly specialized and respected unit within the SAPS specifically created to tackle serious organized crime. His particular role placed him within the Mpumalanga Organized Crime Unit. This was a place of immense power and responsibility, where the most complex and dangerous criminal networks were investigated. As a captain in such a critical unit, Shabash was privy to a wealth of sensitive information. He would have gained deep insights into the intricate workings of criminal investigations, understanding how syndicates operated, their weaknesses, and the precise methods used by law enforcement to bring them down. He understood security protocols, the vulnerabilities of financial institutions, and the tactics employed in large-scale robberies. His role would have involved strategizing, leading operations, and meticulously tracking criminal movements to ensure justice was served. This very background, a foundation built on upholding the law, would later become an effective tool in the grand crime he was accused of committing. He possessed the insider knowledge, the specialized training, and the strategic perspective that, in the wrong hands, could be terrifyingly destructive. However, Shabash's time with the Hawks didn't last forever. In 2011, 3 years before the massive SBV heist would shock the entire country, he made a life-changing decision. He resigned from the South African Police Service. The exact reasons for his departure were never released. Maybe it was frustration with the job, a sense of being unappreciated, or perhaps something darker brewing beneath the surface. Whatever the cause, that moment marked a turning point in his life. It was a quiet exit from a career built on upholding the law, but it also became the first step towards something far more dangerous. Leaving behind the badge didn't mean leaving behind his knowledge of police procedures or his connections within law enforcement. And soon, those same skills he once used to fight crime would be used to commit it, placing him at the heart of one of the biggest heists South Africa had ever seen. Investigators dug deeper into Shabash's background. They discovered that his life had taken a sharp turn after leaving the Hawks. Financial records indicated large sums of money being deposited into his accounts shortly after the heist. These funds did not match his legitimate income. After gathering enough evidence, law enforcement moved in. Early in 2015, a team of officers raided Shabash's residence in Bronkhorstspruit, just outside Pretoria. They arrived before dawn, hoping to catch him off guard. When they knocked on the door, Shabash seemed surprised, but maintained his composure. He didn't resist as they placed him under arrest. Shabash wasn't the only one in trouble. Investigators soon learned he was not acting alone. A total of 13 individuals were involved in the heist, including 2 more former police officers, Luckily Reckon Lakola and Tamsanqa Gladstone Kubeka. These men had used their knowledge of police protocols to make the fake raid believable. The rest of the gang was a mix of civilians and former SBV employees. Each person had played a specific role. Some acted as lookouts, others transported the cash, and a few had been involved in intimidating and kidnapping depot staff. One by one, arrests were made across various locations, including Johannesburg, Pretoria, and surrounding areas. While the arrests were a major success, the investigation wasn't over. Law enforcement needed to find the stolen cash. The Asset Forfeiture Unit was brought in to trace any assets that seemed suspicious or unaccounted for. The team followed the money trail, checking financial records, bank transactions, and recent purchases made by the suspects. During their investigation, they uncovered a workshop in the Witbank area. Inside, they found over R3, $5 million in cash, stacked in bundles similar to those taken from the depot. It was a small victory, but most of the money was still missing. As they continued their search, investigators started noticing something odd. Several suspects had recently acquired expensive assets. They found luxury vehicles that didn't match the suspects' known incomes. The list included a sleek Mercedes-Benz C55 AMG, a rugged Range Rover, and a shiny Harley-Davidson motorcycle. These weren't ordinary purchases. They were symbols of a sudden influx of cash. The Asset Forfeiture Unit quickly moved to seize these vehicles, suspecting that they had been bought with the stolen money. They were impounded and would later be auctioned off to recoup the losses. In 2018, the gang faced trial at the Delmas High Court in Mpumalanga. The courtroom was packed as prosecutors laid out the story, piece by piece. Witnesses testified about the terrifying night of the heist, describing how the fake officers had tricked their way inside. The prosecution focused on Jabash's betrayal of his oath to serve and protect. As a former captain of the Hawks, he had not just broken the law, but had used his authority to commit a crime. His knowledge of police procedures had made the heist possible. When confronted with the evidence, including phone records and financial transactions, the defense had little to counter. One of the strongest pieces of evidence came from cell phone records. These records helped the prosecution prove coordination between the suspects before, during, and after the heist. The communication showed how the group planned their moves, confirming that this was a carefully orchestrated inside job. Witness testimonies also played a crucial role. Employees who were held hostage described the terrifying moments when men dressed as police officers forced their way into the depot. Some spoke of being kidnapped and taken to secret locations, where the criminals attempted to silence them using a toxic substance. These accounts brought the horror of the night to life, showing the court the full scale of the violence and intimidation. The court found all 13 members guilty. Their crimes included robbery with aggravating circumstances, kidnapping, attempted and conspiracy to commit. Each of the convicted received a 20-year prison sentence. The judge made it clear that their betrayal of public trust warranted a harsh punishment. Using police uniforms to deceive and terrorize people was unforgivable. Despite the substantial amount stolen, only a fraction of the funds was recovered. Years later, in 2024, Jabash sought to challenge his conviction. He alleged that cell phone records used as evidence during his trial were fabricated. He filed an application to compel MTN Group Limited to provide detailed itemized billing records for the period surrounding the heist, aiming to prove that he was not in contact with any co-accused before, during, or after the robbery. Jabash argued that these records would demonstrate his innocence and that he was wrongfully convicted. He claimed that the mobile number in question was his, and records would reveal his whereabouts at the time of the crime. However, MTN opposed the application, stating that, according to the Electronic Communications Act and the Independent Communications Authority of SA regulations, they are only required to store communications-related information for a maximum of 3 years. Since Jabash's application came nearly a decade after the crime, MTN no longer had the requested information in its possession. The Gauteng High Court in Pretoria dismissed Jabash's application on March 6, 2024. The judge ruled that Jabash had not made out a case that he was entitled in law to the requested information, and that the relief sought was not legally competent due to the lapse of time. The SBV Cash Depot heist didn't mark the end of heists in South Africa. In fact, just a few years later, another shocking robbery made headlines, the Boksburg heist of 2018. This one was even more daring. It happened in broad daylight on a busy road, and it was all caught on countless cell phone videos. Heavily armed gunmen carrying powerful automatic rifles like AK-47s calmly took positions to control the traffic. Their partners went straight for the armored cash vans, using explosives to blow open the strong safes. In an instant, loud explosions filled the air, and shattered metal and cash scattered across the road like confetti. Videos of money flying through the air, drivers ducking for cover, and the robbers, moving with military-like precision, spread quickly online. It was chaos, and it showed just how bold and organized these gangs had become. For ordinary people caught in the middle, a simple car ride had turned into a terrifying brush with. This wasn't just a one-time incident. It was part of a bigger problem. South Africa was dealing with a heist crisis, and it had to respond. The government and security organizations knew that strong locks and armored doors weren't enough. They needed to go deeper, so they focused on intelligence, gathering information, analyzing crime scenes, and using advanced forensic methods to track down the gangs behind these brutal attacks. Special police units like the Hawks were put in charge of fighting organized crime, going undercover to infiltrate criminal networks and stop these gangs from the inside. But the real shock came when it became clear that many of these heists had inside help. Guards, cash handlers, even police officers had sometimes been involved. So, security companies and law enforcement agencies were forced to look inward. They introduced stricter background checks, lie detector tests, and regular monitoring of employees in sensitive positions. Whistleblower protection programs were also strengthened, allowing honest workers to report suspicious activities without fearing for their safety. The idea was simple: catch the corrupt before they become a problem. Cash-in-transit companies also stepped up their game. They invested in stronger armored vehicles, advanced GPS tracking systems, smarter alarm systems, and special die-pack technology that made stolen money worthless. Security guards received better tactical training, learning how to stay calm and react quickly during violent attacks. And the relationship between private security firms and the police grew closer, with both sides sharing information and coordinating their responses. But despite all these efforts, the battle was far from over. Criminal gangs continued to adapt, finding new ways to strike, and the promise of easy money kept them going.